Welcome. In this video, we will discuss what is popularly referred to as facial recognition technology. We'll walk through what this technology does, how it is implemented in our contemporary world, and uncover its history. We analyze facial recognition technology with three concepts in the Human Context and Ethics Toolkit. We focus on 1. The relationship between FRT and the institutions that employ them, 2. The reductive classification decisions these technologies require, and 3. The ways in which these technologies have profound consequences for people's identities. Let's begin with a quick overview. What is facial recognition technology, and what does it do? Facial recognition systems read the geometry of one's face from a photograph or video and create a map or formula that can be considered one's facial signature. By comparing a signature against others' facial signatures within a database of known faces, they can identify the face. This technology is used to recognize photos or to unlock your phone, and in surveillance and marketing. Often people are subject to facial recognition technology while living their daily lives without knowledge or consent. Now we are ready to dive into our toolkit. We'll use institutions, classification, and identity to analyze the case of facial recognition technology.
Let's consider a few different institutions that use facial recognition technologies. For example, schools deploy facial recognition to help prevent gun and sexual violence or to remotely proctor exams. School administrators can rely on facial recognition to help determine who belongs in the classroom and who does not. Beyond schools, employment organizations actively deploy facial recognition for hiring. Employers use the technology to assess how excited candidates seem about a certain task or how they would behave in a particular work-related situation by analyzing the movement of a person's face. Facial recognition is also deployed to monitor individuals' actions, identify alleged perpetrators, and regulate borders and territorial boundaries by policing and criminal justice institutions. In these settings, the functionality of existing technologies such as traffic cameras, CCTV networks, and police body cameras has expanded surveillance capabilities with the addition of facial recognition technologies. These systems are used by Customs and Border Patrol at entry points to the United States, as well as by law enforcement agencies within the country. Comparing the deployment of facial recognition technology across these three institutions reveals that school administrators, managers, and police departments rely on facial recognition technology to police the boundaries of their institutions, to determine who the institution is primarily responsible to serve, to educate, to employ, to keep secure, and who is an outsider, a stranger in the school, an unfit candidate for a job, a dangerous person. In each case, the boundary between who belongs in the institution and who does not frequently falls along racial lines, with people of color being disproportionately written out. Consider, for example, what this means in the context of a school, where certain students are recognized as belonging to a school and allowed to thrive within it, while others are marked as outsiders. What happens when recognition technology inaccurately labels a student of color as an outsider? It is not an accident that facial recognition technology is used to police institutional boundaries. Today's facial recognition technology owes its core principles of distinguishing among people based on facial characteristics to the discredited sciences of phrenology and craniometry of the 19th and early 20th centuries. These pseudosciences were centered on biometrics, that is, the measurement of bodies, to determine qualities of the person's personality or behavior, such as the propensity to be a good husband or a criminal. Proponents of these sciences and techniques viewed crime as an innate biological quality of the individual, instead of a result of social circumstances. And they deployed criminologist techniques to confirm their eugenic belief that people they already deemed as undesirable, those who are black, brown, poor, disabled, should be barred from society. This history has profound consequences for the way in which the use of facial recognition today informs people's experiences in the institutions that employ it. Technology creators today recognize that these tools disproportionately discriminate against minoritized people. But these technology creators frequently point to datasets as the problem. They claim misrecognition takes place because facial recognition technology datasets lack enough faces of color to learn from. However, the problem is not so simplistic. Instead, scientists and engineers who think more critically, as HCE pushes us to do, emphasize that algorithmic features in facial misrecognition reside in decisions and stereotyping by individual engineers, low levels of workplace diversity within technology companies, and pre-existing biased research and practices. Paying attention to the ways in which institutional contexts influence how a technology is designed or used, or the way in which the social functions of institutions are transformed through the deployment of technology, reframes the problem from superficial flaws in the algorithm to systemic problems in the alliance between facial recognition technology and institutional goals and histories. A technology designed to discriminate among people on grounds of facial characteristics, fed a diet of data biased by structural inequities, produces prejudiced classifications and representations, which brings us to our next HCE tool spotlight.
To best understand the ramifications of classification in facial recognition technology, we turn to the policing and surveillance context. Facial recognition works by organizing or classifying people's facial maps into constructed categories, such as race and gender, which are in turn used to make predictions about the type of person one is and what one might do. The resultant classifications inform how people are treated, for example, whether they are surveilled or given certain resources or denied support. For example, being classified as disabled might shape how a person is treated by employers, hospitals, or insurance companies. These technologies are ill-suited and poorly developed when it comes to recognizing non-white, non-male people. Let's take an example from Amazon's popular recognition technology. The recognition algorithm wrongly classified women as men 19% of the time, and mistook darker-skinned women for men 31% of the time. Because these algorithms are designed to hold whiteness and maleness, two very powerful identities in today's society, as being their norm or baseline, they inherently classify all other identities as some sort of divergence or deviance from these norms. This white-centric logic of classification makes discrimination appear objective or neutral. Looking at the classification systems that facial recognition technologies work within reveals how dependent these algorithms are upon human social constructs and imaginaries. They are nourished by the same human prejudices that have produced and sustained unjust societies via the customs, norms, laws, practices, and organizations we construct to regulate us. Classifying people into categories influences not only how social advantage and disadvantage is distributed, like unequal distribution of resources, wrongful incarceration, or social stigma, but it also informs people's identities.
Identity. Facial recognition technologies claim to reveal intimate information about a person. They make conclusions about what a person's face says in ways that make claims on their identity. Depending on the context, certain faces are read as being socially accepted identities, while others are marginalized and endure tangible consequences as a result. These so-called recognition technologies make different people visible in selective and selectively biased ways. The politics of visibility are especially important when people of varying identities are subjected to facial recognition within a surveillance context and without their consent. For example, when trying to solve a shoplifting case in Detroit, Michigan, investigators relied on facial recognition technologies to match camera footage with those in their database of faces. This led to the wrongful arrest of Robert Julian Borchet Williams, a black man who suffered a racially biased facial recognition algorithm. Not only did this technology misrepresent Mr. Williams based on the stigmas that inform its algorithms, but it also wrongly created a racialized criminal stigma that Mr. Williams will now have to cope with. Existing racial biases in our law enforcement systems are baked into the facial recognition algorithms and technologies used in policing and impact people in systematically harmful ways. We see similar biases with misidentification when facial recognition is used to hire a job candidate. Here, the technology universalizes facial expressions in a way that assumes away the cultural nuances in how people express emotions. Their logic supposes that people of all ethnic and racial backgrounds should express emotions on their faces according to white, Western cultural norms. Thus, these technologies cannot see or read non-white faces and do not lead to the fair hiring of non-white candidates. Identity is not only forged by these technologies, but it also creates technologies, institutions, and inequality. When only engineers who are white and economically privileged design facial recognition algorithms, which is often the case, they end up reinforcing institutional discrimination and their personal privilege via technological products. As a result, we are left with technologies devoid of diverse worldviews and identities.
The founding fathers of biometrics in the 19th century viewed criminality through the subjective lens of what made for a well-ordered society, which people, bodies, and actions were considered good and beautiful, and which were seen as disruptive and ugly, who could be welcomed and recognized as a full member of society, and who was labeled as dangerous and ostracized. The sciences and technologies that these white men created enabled them to order society according to their views, and further entrenched their belief that the categories in which they were sorting people were natural and objective. Today's facial recognition technologies and their developers perform the same ordering work, and unfortunately all too often reflect the same eugenic principles. FRT forge, reward, and punish human identities. They classify bodies according to unexamined and reductive categories, and do so in context of institutions with their own histories of oppression. Analysis of FRT with 3 HCE tools, institutions, classification, and identity, reveals that technologies that claim to make uncritical connections between biological factors and social reality are problematic. HCE analysis draws our attention to the human choices, interests, and ingrained social structures that need to be considered and addressed to responsibly develop and use these tools.